Could Iran really restore its monarchy? As protests surge across the country, a question that until recently seemed almost unthinkable has begun to resurface. For years, opposition to the Islamic Republic has centred on replacing religious rule with what many believed would be a secular republic. But amidst growing anger, economic collapse and violent repression, symbols of the old monarchy have started appearing on the streets. As the former Crown Prince has voiced his support for the demonstrators, many have speculated that he may yet return to reinstate the monarchy. But is all this really and truly possible? Hello and welcome. My name is James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict and security. There was a time when many countries were monarchies, either directly or as part of an empire. However, over the past century, the number of such states has steadily decreased as more countries have adopted republican forms of government, sometimes following violent revolutions. Today, just over 40 states are still ruled by a king, queen, emperor, prince or grand duke. But occasionally, a former ruler will return. For instance, in Spain, the re-establishment of the monarchy after Franco's death helped stabilise the country's transition to democracy. Another, more unusual example was Bulgaria. In 2001, the former king, Simeon Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, returned from exile and was elected prime minister, taking power within a republican system rather than restoring the throne. All this has come to the fore with increasing protests in Iran, as speculation intensifies that the Islamic Republic may finally be overthrown. One of the loudest and most recognisable voices calling for an end of theocratic rule is the former Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. From exile, he's presented himself as a unifying figure calling for political change. Meanwhile, images of Iran's pre-revolutionary flag have appeared on the streets as slogans praising the former Shah have circulated online. For supporters, the monarchy represents a lost era of stability and national pride. However, for critics, it recalls memories of authoritarianism and inequality. Iran boasts an exceptionally long and rich history. Under the Achaemenid Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great in the 6th century BCE, Persia, as Iran was long known, ruled over vast territories extending from Central Asia to the Mediterranean. Later, other dynasties reinforced Iran's standing as a major power. However, by the 19th century, under the Qajar dynasty, Iran had become politically weak and was increasingly vulnerable to the influence of rising European imperial powers such as Britain and Russia. And it was against this backdrop of decline and humiliation that modern Iranian nationalism started to develop. In 1925, Reza Khan, a military officer who'd risen through the ranks, deposed the Qajar king, or Shah as he was known, and crowned himself Reza Shah Pahlavi. From the start, his rule was aimed at fundamental reform. Centralising authority, he clamped down on tribal and clerical power. At the same time, he began developing the country's education and infrastructure. However, all of this came at a steep price. Ruling as an autocrat, he suppressed dissent and heavily restricted political freedoms. However, after just over a decade and a half in power, his reign was ended in 1941. Having shown too much sympathy for Nazi Germany and under pressure from Britain and the Soviet Union, he was forced to abdicate during the Second World War. The throne then instead passed to his son, Mohamed Reza Shah Pahlavi. Under the new Shah, the monarchy became both more powerful and more controversial. At first, Mohamed Reza Shah ruled within a constrained political environment. However, over time, he consolidated his authority. This gathered pace after 1953, when the country's Prime Minister, Mohamed Mossadegh, was overthrown in a Western-backed coup after he tried to nationalise the country's oil industry. Against the backdrop of the Cold War, the Shah presented himself as a champion of modernisation and a defence against communism. But while he promoted things such as land reform, expanded education and supported women's rights, he also suppressed any and all opposition. Under his feared and notoriously brutal secret police, SAVAK, opposition parties were eliminated, elections were rigged, and regime opponents were intimidated, arrested, tortured, and often executed. Meanwhile, as oil revenues surged in the 1970s, the regime became progressively more extravagant. As the Shah and the ruling elite grew wealthier, living in luxury and organising lavish celebrations, their affluence starkly contrasted with the widespread poverty in many parts of the country. And by the end of the decade, many Iranians from across the political and social spectrum had come to view the monarchy as an arrogant and out-of-touch symbol of corruption and profound inequality. All this would eventually reach a crisis point in 1978 when a wave of protests spread across the country. But despite efforts to suppress the demonstrations, the Shah, who was now seriously ill, was left isolated both at home and abroad. As the Iranian Revolution gained momentum, the Shah fled the country in January 1979. And within weeks, he had been replaced by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who returned from exile to take the reins of power. And soon afterwards, the monarchy was abolished and replaced by the Islamic Republic of Iran. Meanwhile, following his exile, the Shah spent the last months of his life moving between countries that were willing to offer him temporary refuge before dying in exile in Egypt in 1980. Meanwhile, members of his family, including his son, the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, settled in the United States and France. I hope you're finding this helpful. If so, please do give it a like and perhaps subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks so much, and now back to the video. In the decades following the revolution, Iran established a political system centred on religious dominance. Ultimate authority was held by a supreme leader who stood above elected bodies. Furthermore, while it holds regular elections, strict controls limit who in fact can stand for office, ensuring that power remains in the hands of unelected officials. Meanwhile, the country has also faced growing social and economic problems. As religious rules were strictly applied, women in particular faced harsh repression, as compulsory use of the headscarf saw the morality police become hated symbols of the regime. To add to this, economic mismanagement, corruption and international sanctions have steadily undermined the country's living standards. In turn, all this has seen growing opposition to the regime over the past several decades. Younger generations who've no memory of the revolution have come to see the state as oppressive, often sparking waves of protest. But while the regime has successfully managed to stay in power, each cycle has been met with ever harsher crackdowns. All this has in turn reinforced the view that the leadership is either unwilling or unable to reform. And it's against this backdrop that the latest wave of protests has erupted. Following its air war with Israel in June 2025, a new wave of demonstrations erupted towards the end of the year. Triggered by economic collapse, severe water shortages and deep-rooted discontent, these have spread rapidly across the country. And once again, the state's response has been brutal. Despite US warnings that violence against protesters would be met with a harsh response, the crackdown has now led to hundreds of deaths. Nevertheless, despite the violence, there's now a sense that the regime may in fact be nearing collapse. And it's within this context that some have started calling for the monarchy to return. Aside from flags of the old regime appearing at protests, there have also been online chatter about the return of the Shah. And although these calls have been limited so far, they have been enough to attract global attention. Meanwhile, although he's deliberately avoided calls to return as king, Reza Pahlavi has built on this sentiment. In his statements, he's portrayed himself as a transitional figure who could help guide Iran towards a democratic referendum on its future political system. So, could the monarchy really return to Iran? In a narrow sense, it appears highly unlikely. While it might seem appealing to some, particularly as the Crown Prince could become a single, immediate figure to unify the country during a time of transition, there are many more reasons to believe it won't happen. To begin with, there's no clear domestic backing for a return to monarchy, let alone an organised movement with widespread support to actually push for it. Similarly, no external power appears willing to enforce such a result. And while most of the country is too young to recall Iran under the last Shah, many Iranians still remember the repression and inequality of that era. Few will be eager to see it return. Instead, if Iran does remove its theocratic rulers, the new administration is far more likely to be a secular republic, driven by pragmatic compromise rather than the romantic restoration of a king. Nevertheless, in a broader sense, the rise of royalist symbols is highly significant. While it may not constitute a genuine call for the restoration of the monarchy, it vividly highlights the extent of disillusionment with the current system. In this way, the calls serve not as a credible alternative to the existing regime, but rather as another means to challenge it, and to challenge it in a way that many will know is bound to stir up particular anger. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.